My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I've spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. And we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DTD Podcast. This week in the studio, a guest with 31 years of service to this country in the United States Navy. His certifications include, but are not limited to, Surface Warfare Specialist, Search and Rescue Swimmer, Submarine Dolphins, Special Boat Teams, and is a Navy SEAL that has assignments with SEAL Teams 3, 1, Naval Special Warfare Group, and the Special Operations Command. He has combat deployments to Baghdad, Fallujah, Rhamadi, Haditha, Asad, and Colombia. My guest since retiring has worked with the Honor Foundation and the Warriors and Whiskey Club, an organization that partners with various veteran charities and veteran-owned businesses that are dedicated to improve our veteran community. And after all those years of service, we're going to hear the true story of what a career like that does to you mentally and physically. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Tim Fedrick. What's going on, my friend?
Not much, DJ. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I am so happy that you're here and you have such a long and illustrious career that we have so much to talk to. But I think the first question I want out, and it's a really off the wall one, how great is the movie Navy SEALs?
Well, looking back on it now, and I'll get a lot of crap because, people say, "Are you kidding me? That's why you came in." And in '90, I didn't know much at all, if anything, about Naval Special Warfare and the SEAL teams. And I was dead set on going to small school baseball there in East Tennessee. And then right after I graduated in 1990, the summer, that movie came out with Charlie Sheen, Michael Biehn, went and saw it. I'm like, that'd be a really cool job, but nothing before that. I haven't heard anything, but like I said, I get a lot of crap for saying that I came in for that movie. I'm sure my friends that hear this will get on to me again, but it's the truth.
Well, I'm telling you, I fell in love with that movie when I saw it. I still try to convince people to this day that it's one of the greatest action movies ever made. A lot of people don't believe me. But let's go back. Let's talk about your childhood for a little bit. You were born in Mississippi, but you were raised in a couple of different states. So if we can talk about kind of your upbringing, what kind of set you on this path? Because you didn't really know about the Navy SEALs and stuff, but was your family military family? Was it law enforcement oriented, first responder oriented? And what kind of just set you down that path?
Well, I was born in Natchez, Mississippi, grew up in Faraday, Louisiana, home of Mickey Gilley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Jimmy Swaggart, by the way. And so I grew up there playing sports. My dad was in the Army for a short period and then went into the National Guard. Didn't really have any connections growing up to the Navy. I definitely had some connections to my dad's buddies that was all in the Army and in the National Guard specifically. But really just sports, whether it be summer league ball, fall football. And then once I got into school and in a grade high enough to where they had those sports programs available, that was where my focus was, football and baseball mainly.
So with your dad being in the Army and then going to the National Guard, was it talked about in your house really of you having a military career or him kind of pushing you down that path?
No, absolutely not. I think if anything, it would have been the opposite. He would be pushing me down the sports path because he was big into sports as well. And from the time I could see a television or listen to a radio, I'm still to this day I do that. If there's a ball game on and I'm not working, then I'm tuning into the ball game. And if I'm overseas and all I have is the radio, I'll still tune in with the radio. But no, I'd say just the opposite. It's he I can't say he had a bad time in the military, but he just didn't talk about it much. Our focus was in the sports world.
Your relationship with him, I'm guessing, with how you talk about him, it was a close relationship.
Yeah, you could say that. Me and my brother was close. We spent a lot of time with our aunt, and he traveled a good bit with the military when I was real young, So we would just go to our aunt there in Clayton, Louisiana, and hang out and play ball and go run around the golf course there in Faraday. But other than that, I'd have to say, growing up small, he was traveling all the time, as most of us did often in the military.
Right. Well, with all that and with him not really pushing you down that path, now I hear that you were looking at scholarships to go to college, and that was what was really kind of keeping you on the border of whether you were going to go military, whether you were going to go to college, was if these kind of sports scholarships came through for you.
Yeah, I had some small school scholarships, Cumberland College, Warren Wilson, and so forth. But until I saw that movie, even if something would have happened with a scholarship and nothing happened, I don't guess I got far enough into that process. I saw that movie. I went to the recruiter station in Knoxville, Tennessee, not long after that, and ended up joining. I came in under the dive farer program, which was a 6-year commitment. I was convinced that you probably should just do 4. If you like it, you can always do more. You can get more bonus money that way. So it was a path that wasn't straight in the buds for me once I did get in. So I had to go into the fleet. That's where I got my surface warfare pin. And I can't say that I was happy at the time. I went to the USS Arleigh Burke, the pre-commissioning unit. I was part of Maine crew, and then we also had Virginia crew. And there was very few of us up in Maine, and as an E2, maybe even an E1, I think E2, I had a very small space to clean, I should say. You couldn't touch anything on the ship. So all I did was work out, get ready for SAR school, went to SEER school up in Maine, and just prep for Budge from that point on. And the operations officer, he was real flexible with me. He's like, hey, we need a SAR swimmer. You can use this as a stepping stone to get into Budge. And he left about 2 years into that tour, so it extended mine out a little bit when the new ops officer rolled in. But in hindsight, I have to say that it was probably the best thing for me. I was young. I was straight out of high school. I didn't know much. And looking back, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Although for the people that knew me back then, they're probably like, this guy, he don't want to be here. He wants to be somewhere else, and my friends, they probably had to deal with a little bit of that, but they understood. I had some close friends still talk to this day, that was on there with me, a number of them. And, so they're still there for me if I need them, and vice versa. And like I said, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Now,
well, I think it's interesting. A couple of the things that you say, you said that they were very flexible with you. They gave you kind of that background, which I don't think, and I think you would agree that you would get a lot of places. They would be more concerned about the job you're doing for them, not about what you want to do in the future. So 1, you got that. 2, you got to try out different things like search and rescue swimmer and all these different things to make sure that your head was right for where you were about to go. And I've heard you say numerous times that being on that ship and doing the surface warfare and being the radio man, that really is a good memory of your life in the Navy, and that you think it set you down that path and really got you prepared for what was getting ready to come at you.
Yes, definitely. As I got more senior enlisted wise, and then later as an officer, I could always tell the person that had fleet experience, regardless of what their rate was, because we didn't have our own SEAL rating at that time. That came along. I was already an officer in 2006 by the time that came along. But we tested in our rating. I can't say that and then that was another benefit. I knew at least what the equipment looked like as far
Right.
as what you were testing on. There was no SEAL rating test at that time, and everything that we did, it didn't really matter advancement wise. Yeah, some of it helped you got extra points for wards, but you had to test out in your rating. And some of our guys, they didn't even know what the equipment that they were being tested on looked like. They didn't know what it did. And at least I had that, and I could probably narrow down a four question or four questions, at least 50-50. And I would, 9 times out of 10, I did well on most all of the advancement exams because I could at least know what they were talking about and a little bit about what the equipment did, at least from a ship's perspective. So yes, as a leader, whether it be as a chief, a senior chief, and then later as an officer, you could always tell who had that experience, who didn't. You could tell who could work well with the submarine crew and the ship's crew, and who needed a little bit of assistance with it. So it was very valuable. And again, I wouldn't trade it for the world in hindsight.
Well, and that was another point that I wanted to bring up to you was with this service, I have a question that comes to mind. Do you think that because you said you always knew when someone had been in the fleet and stuff later on, but looking back on it, do you think it made you a better operator when you were with special operations? And to tack onto that, do you think it made you a better officer because you have seen it from every level of the crap jobs that you can get, of having to do everything they do? So do you think it put you in a different mindset, one, as a special operator working with big Navy, and then two, working as an officer with enlisted people?
I can't say that it made me a better operator. It definitely made me a better enlisted leader and leader as an officer. And then it definitely gave me the tools that I needed to be able to best communicate with the fleet if we were on a ship, if we were working with air crew, or if we were working on a submarine, or if we were working in a joint environment, like when Iraq and Afghanistan, Somalia, all those places came online after 9/11, all of that, it played into all of that. But not really as an operator, I can't say, because our trainers is what gets you, and our training programs and our leaders that mentor us along the way gets us to be better operators. But definitely leadership. It helped me a ton.
Well, and I guess what I mean by being a better special operator, just I think being around guys that have been there and done that and seen it from all perspectives. I guess that's what I mean. You understand more why people might complain or why they might be upset where they're at and stuff like that, just because you've seen that life before you were in this other world.
Yeah, you definitely appreciate. I always remember where I come from. Same thing when I went officer. Remember where you come from. Remember when you was an E1, E2. And you needed a little bit of extra coaching along the way, or counseling along the way. So just in remembering where I come from, and then relating to wherever I'm at and whatever environment that I was working in, whether it be joint or whether it be with other Navy units outside of the spec war community, it all played for me. And again, I think it was very helpful getting me to where I got when it was time for me to go do something else.
Now, being a sports person, I'm guessing you never really had any trouble with the physicality of it, whether that be, search and rescue school, SEER school, BUDS. I'm guessing you didn't. And I've heard you say that it was more mind than physical. So can we talk a little bit about your mind state going into all of those different things, not just necessarily BUDS?
Yeah, you go all the way back to SAR school. I've learned to never judge a book by its cover. Never judge a person as far as your initial perception is what they can and cannot do, because 9 times out of 10, you probably are going to be surprised. So with that, in my opinion, and this goes with pretty much any special operations commander unit, if you meet the physical requirements to get in, and they all come with their own PT test and physical requirements that you have to meet, or you can't get in. If you can meet that, then it's all mental from there. And like those long programs like BUDS and some of the other spec ops training pipelines, you can't look ahead until when you're finished, when you're on day one, or when you haven't even formed up yet. So I like to take things and I like to break them down into sections or chunks. Like for Hell Week, for example, we started Hell Week, went through a winter Hell Week, and I have to say, if I were to do Hell Week over again, I would want to go through in the summer, because you can make me. I don't like 8-count bodybuilders. I don't like chase the rabbits. I don't like all these other things that they made us do that was painful and then definitely hurt. But when they had us laying out in that surf, and my swim buddy, he was just the opposite. He would much prefer laying in that surf, as cold as it was. He was good with it. I wasn't. I would rather get out and get hammered instead of being laying there. So with that, I went through that winter Hell Week, and that definitely takes a toll on you mentally, even though it's painful over time physically. That cold water does some things to your mind. The long game is definitely mental. And in a Hell Week type scenario, when I mean by breaking it down into chunks, is we started at like 6:30 p.m. on a Sunday. I think we had our first rest on Wednesday morning. We got another couple hours on Wednesday night, and then you get secured from Hell Week midday Friday around 12 or 1 down at the demo pits. So if somebody catches himself on, as soon as you do breakout, and that's what the instructors call it and students call when your Hell Week starts, call it breakout. If you're already looking ahead to when that's over, then you got a long week coming.
Right.
So I break it down from chow to chow. You just get to the next chow, and then from that chow you eat. Hopefully you get to go inside. My crew, we were never inside. We were always out watching the boats, eating MREs. So we didn't even get that as a break, because if you don't win, then you come in either last, next to last, or whatever. You can bet you're going to be outside. Then you just go to the next chow from there. And then you do that. You get fed 4 times, so that's a saving grace in Hell Week. They got to keep you fed, keep your energy levels up. Unlike in a ranger school, to where you don't get much sleep and you don't get fed either, really, much anyway. There you get fed, and you're going to get fed 4 meals a day. So just go 4 meal, chow to chow, get to that meal, and then start worrying about the next meal after that. But don't look at past that, and then don't look at it in between. Just get to that next chow, and that's a good way to break down anything that a person would consider something hard and then long. Is just break it down in segments.
Well, you're not the first guy on here that said that they do that meal plan where they go from just breakfast, lunch, dinner, and that gets them through everything. Do you think that has followed you through your whole career and into transition in civilian life, where you just take, when you're looking at a project in front of you and you've had some big ones out in front of you, do you just take it in those small little chunks too?
It depends on when I have a lot of increments in between from where I start and to where I want to go, then yes. But it all depends on the situation, what I'm doing, what I'm planning for. But if it's a long way out, then chances are yes. And then I always will remember in taking it in chunks. And then you got the elephant analogy. But just take it one bite at a time. Take it in chunks, and then. But that depends on how far out it is. It depends on how many steps is in the process, and so forth. But that's always in the back of my head if it's applicable. And same thing with a 6-month deployment or a year deployment. Right. If you go over, and then let's face it, some of our folks, not just in the Spec Ops community, ever since 9/11, they've been deploying ever 6 months, ever 9 months, year and a half. They're still doing it to this date. So if you catch yourself on a 6 month deployment or a year-long deployment, and then you start thinking about going home from the day you get there, and instead of breaking it down into segments or chunks or reasonable sections, then you're doing yourself a huge disfavor. So on a deployment, if I were to do another trip overseas and it were to last 6 months or a year, by all means, I would definitely go back to how I break things down into smaller pieces and then tackle one piece at a time. Absolutely.
Now, mentally, how are you as you come out of buds and stuff? You're getting ready to go to SEAL Team 3. You're going to be the new guy. How are you? And I like to ask this all the way through careers, and you have an exceptionally long career. How are you mentally, physically, and be really specific about mentally and physically if there's any kind of injuries as you go to your first team?
Well, coming out of buds, I think I was 22. Physically, I was good to go, and then you're probably a little overconfident about what you can do. To be honest with you, we went down to our airborne course, and we definitely didn't. None of us had any hard times at all in getting through the I think it was 3 weeks at that time, somewhere up in there. Those type of courses. So if anything, being young, a little bit overconfident in our abilities, and not arrogant. I always had it in me to never be looked at or thought of as being arrogant. So I don't want to go that far. But physically, I was good. There was some guys that had some lower leg problems and so forth, and some of the older guys may have had some back problems that were already bothering them. Because we did have a lot more people come in that was a little bit older at that time than the pipeline as it is now. Currently, it's completely different. So mentally, same thing. We come out of there, they break you down in buds and then build you back up, and that's not just physically, that's mentally as well. And so we're very confident in ourselves, very confident in our abilities, confident in the training that we received, even though in looking back, basic underwater demolition SEAL training is as basic as it gets in our community. It doesn't get any more basic than that, so how confident we were when you look at it from those terms, we were probably a little overconfident. But it's it was a great building block to when we did get to our team, whatever that team may be. In my case, it was Team 3, the training cell. We had several Vietnam vets that was in our cadre that trained us the way they were trained and with what they thought we needed from what they witnessed on multiple tours to Vietnam. So I was fortunate at my team. I think we had 3 of them up there, maybe even 4. And most of them had break-in service to where they got out, didn't find happiness with their new line of work, so they came back in. One as late as 15 years later, and one maybe even a little longer than that. So we took that training to heart. They were hard on us. They were rough on us, I guess you could say, but it paid dividends in the end.
When you have stuff like that, when you have these guys come in that were Vietnam era, and I want to talk to you specifically about this. So we're talking 95. You go 7th of December, which was 95. We're kind of in, I guess, what you would call a lull in the military. Not really major things going on. There are hot spots and things like that, and there is stuff being done, but you come in. So I've heard guys that came in before the global war on terror, and they said they got through all this training and then they were worried that they might never put that to use. So when you get there to SEAL Team 3, you've got these Vietnam guys, you've got guys that have seen it. What are we looking at, like rotations, op tempo, and different things like that? Are you getting work? Are you able to get out and become what you did all this training for, or are you just kind of learning to be what you were training to do?
Well, in looking back at my Team 3 days, and then it was from 95 to to, I think, May of '01. And, I did Bravo platoon back to back to back. The first platoon in Org Alphas, amphibious readiness groups, we were with 11th MU, with Colonel Blows from 11th MU. We worked with them on the Essex Org. And we were on, that was the mothership, we called it. And then we were on the Cleveland. And during that Org Alpha, our leadership worked it out to where we would just, we rode the ship very little. And not many people complain about that. And we would meet the ship and basically wherever they were heading, we would just fly ahead and meet them there if we were going to ride to the next leg. If not, we would just go a couple of stops ahead of them. So that was very cool. So you had to work up for that Org Alpha. But at the time, other than the Org Alpha and Org Bravo, SEAL Team 3 was the Middle East, Southwest Asia team. Like SEAL Team 4 on the East Coast was the South America team. And we went away from that. We definitely went away from that after 9/11. But in the early 90s, mid-90s, that's what we were doing. We were Southwest Asia. That was our primary focus. We even wore desert fatigues, the old desert uniforms. That was our uniform, different than all the other commands. That later went away as well, so the next platoon, we were a Southwest Asia platoon, and then my third platoon was Southwest Asia. So we were all over the Middle East, with the exception of no one was in Iraq at that time, no one was in Afghanistan at that time, but everywhere else in the Middle East, and honestly not many of the stands. But everywhere else in the Middle East, that's where my team deployed to, and that's where my two Southwest Asia platoons, and to a degree, my Org Alpha, the first platoon I did, we were doing JSET after JSET, exercise after exercise. So we were going through those, we looked at them as hard workups, and those workups were a lot harder than the deployments. We would say that all the time, me and my buddies. And so it was a very hard workup to go do FID, or to go do JSETs, or to go do exercises. And some people decided they were going to get out and do something else. Others decided they were going to stick it out. And then lo and behold, in 2001, 9/11 happened. And then after that, the military as a whole changed. And we're still kind of, some units are still seeing op-tempo pretty much the same as what they saw right after 9/11 happening. So it hadn't changed much for some in their deployments to what you can call hot areas, whether it be Yemen, Somalia, Syria, to name a few. But it was a very hard workup to conduct exercises and to conduct FID and JSETs, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. Now, what I want to ask you, though, is, and we're going to get into Yemen in just a minute, but as you're doing this, and the Middle East being your area of operation, we're talking 6 years before 9/11 happens. Are you seeing, as what you're doing in your job, are you seeing the workup towards 9/11? And what I mean by that is not the U.S. military, or maybe the U.S. military, but more than that, are you seeing terrorism become the level that it's going to become after 9/11? Are you seeing it pop up? Are you seeing it being more radical? And as the time goes on, it gets more and more of an influence?
I have to say that I've always, maybe not to the scale of 9/11, but I've always, and then maybe I contribute this to us being trained by those Vietnam vets and how they were always in our ear. And the way they trained us, honestly, you probably couldn't go out and train a unit today without the trainers getting in trouble, or it just was appropriate during their time, maybe not appropriate with their training methods today. They didn't want to cut any corners. They wanted to give you as realistic as training as possible, which as a former training officer, that's huge. You can't be afraid of your own shadow, and you can't be afraid of getting somebody hurt, because the military as a whole, and Spec Ops in particular, you have to have realistic training. Or after a 9/11 type scenario, you go into their battle space or you go onto their homeland and go to battle. You're going to be on the losing end if you don't have that training, realistic training at that, to back you up or to fall back on. Because you are going to fall back on your training if something happens. You could go and in combat, as you know, and as many other of your guests know, things can go from being perfectly normal to not normal at all in the snap of a finger, and it could be chaos, going from completely a great day to just outright chaos in a matter of seconds. So you're definitely going to fall back on that training. You're going to communicate accordingly, and you're going to take care of your teammates, and they're going to take care of you. But our workups back then were all pretty much a year and a half, maybe a little over, sometimes a little under, depending on what was going on, and a rotation here or there. But and in a 6-7 month deployment, that's what we had prior to 9/11. And then some units kind of kept that rotation after 9/11, but some units, obviously worked at 3 months on, 9 months off, and so forth. So I guess that depends on your unit and how you're tasked and how the tasking comes down as to how long your workup is, whether you're on call or standby, or whether you just have a set schedule. It just depends on where you're at and where you're working at the time with that. But ours was a year and a half workup and at least 6 month deployment. And that's what all three of mine was at Team 3. And with that, going back to the fleet again, it paid dividends for me again because my platoon that I was set to go to SEAL qualification training. We called it, actually it was SEAL tactical training at that time, STT. And I was dead set to go to that. And then until you class up, you were doing camp guard. You were going out watching various camps and supporting whoever from your team, whatever platoon was out there. Well, not me, because of that fleet experience. I just happened to be a radium in this platoon that was forming up as soon as they got off a lead. Needed a radiumman. We were going to be an ARG Alpha. They needed fleet experience, and then I brought all that to them. They snapped me right up, so I went, instead of doing all that other stuff I just mentioned, I went right into a platoon and started my career off right. And there's a lot of things that I knew that I was able to carry forward with me, like the bridge right under the main bridge. I knew nobody was using that, and they gave that to us, to where our guys, instead of setting up the green radios to where you're not going to get a signal anyway because those powerful antennas on the ship's going to knock it down, with the little man packs we'd carry, our guys would struggle with that. Our OIC, he would just go up to Flag Bridge and at a pre-designated time and bandwidth, whether it be HF, UHF, VHF, line of sight, he would just go up, pick up the phone at the pre-designated schedule, and then talk to the boss on the other ship. That was kind of unheard of back in the mid-90s. We were usually doing that ourselves. But that's just me with that fleet experience and knowing who to go talk to, who to make friends with. And they literally gave us the space. So we had it made, not just for a planning space, but communicating with our mothership. But so it paid dividends time and time again for me. But that's another example of how it came into play later.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess a more succinct question would be, did you see 9/11 on the horizon with everything you were doing in the Middle East? Do you see something like that happening, or do you think it's going to be just business as usual that you've been doing?
I knew at some point we were going to get hit, and then I go back to not to the scale that 9/11 was, where the towers came down, the planes crashing in multiple locations. But I did see something coming. I felt something coming. Obviously, I didn't know what, and then I had no idea as to what the scale was going to be. But there's a lot of bad people in this world, and for the people that think you can make friends with everybody, some people in some locations just don't like who you are and what you stand for. So it's impossible to make friends with everybody. Some people just are not willing to reciprocate, and so it's probably at some point, something is going to happen again, and I hope not, but I'm not naive as to think that it's not going to. If you look at the current events and so forth, I'll leave that one at that. But I hope we don't get hit again, but I won't be surprised.
Well, the reason I asked that is, let's talk about Yemen for a minute. Now, you're in Yemen from July to September July through September of 2000. Now, October of 2000, the USS Cole is attacked. October 12th, it's attacked. So it's a month after you leave there. I want to know what you saw as the state of Yemen while you were there, because you're there building all the way up to that attack. How is it changing geopolitically? How is it changing with what you guys are doing on the ground? And then after it happens, what are your feelings after just leaving and then this happens on an attack on something that I'm sure you would be close by to?
Well, like you mentioned, I had left there very close to when the Cole got hit down in Aden. I was primarily working out in the mountains out of Haditha and are in and around the embassy there at Sana'a. Yemen, I'll call it the Wild Wild West. It was different than some of the other areas that I had deployed to in the Middle East. And I was fortunate. We worked with the Navy and the Army there, and their branches of service is not large, especially within the Spec Ops area. They have a small number of troops, whether you're talking Army or Navy, and for the most part, I worked with both of them for that 3 weeks to a month that we was there. With that, there was some things that we saw and then that we observed, and there in the in Haditha especially, that there was a lot of off limits areas. And there was reasons behind those areas being off limits, and there was reasons behind us having the level of security that we did. We couldn't even go run without our security. If we went running, they had to go running or get on a bike or a moped or something. But we had our restrictions, but there was reasons behind it. So with all of that building up, you could definitely sense and feel something happening. Maybe not there, but there in the region, if nowhere else. You could sense it. Did I think that the Cole was going to get hit a month and a half, 2 months later? No, absolutely not. But it did, and Aden wasn't too far south of where we were in Haditha. My sister platoon responded to that, and that operations officer that I told you about that told me to use SAR school as a stepping stone. That was at the time Commander Lippold, by the way, who was the CO of the Colt. And that man he was a great leader. He had a lot left in him, and that was a tragic event that. I wish it wouldn't happen to anybody, and I definitely wish it wouldn't happen to him, because he definitely was going to go higher than an 05. He took care of his people. He was a great leader, and then he gets hit, and the side of his boat taken out. But he was my operations officer that allowed me to go to SAR school, that allowed me to schedule SEER school, and use that as stepping stones to go to BUDS, and then he left 2 months in. But that was Commander Lippold, that was the CO of the Cole when it got hit, and I know he had a lot left in the tank, and it's too bad. I'm very sorry I was very sorry to see that and hear that for anybody, and especially him.
So with this attack, does it make everything, because from what I'm understanding with all the workups and everything like that, not really seeing anything on that scale, When that happens, does it change your perspective and make it, of course it's always real to you, but does it change your perspective on what you're doing now? Does it give you a new outlook on the kind of work that you're going to be doing for the rest of your pretty much adult life?
I love sporting events, but at the same time, I don't like big crowds. I don't like, you're not really in control as much as you can be if you're in the middle of a big crowd, because you don't really know who's who in that crowd, especially when you're overseas. So in the back of my head, I always try to be, and I recommend it for everybody, aware of your surroundings. If something doesn't look right, if something doesn't feel right and seem right, trust your gut. I would probably move on or move away from that area if you're in a location where you get those feelings, because something probably is not right. And that's the same thing overseas. When that calm before the storm, it's real calm out, and you're like, man, I figured it'd be a lot more people out here, and there ain't nobody out here. Well, that's a sign that something probably is about to happen when usually there's a lot more going on around here, So treat that as a sign. Don't just say, oh, it's super calm tonight, everything's chill. It might not be chill for long. So don't drop your guard. Be aware of your surroundings. Don't take the same route, even here. Don't take the same route every day. Do something different. But just be aware. Situational awareness is huge. It's huge here. And it's huge, especially when you're not around your hometown or even in CONUS. You're outside of CONUS, OCONUS. Then just be aware of your surroundings. Don't do the same thing. Don't take the same path. And if something feels like it's not right, it probably isn't. Trust your instincts.
So I'm guessing you were going into your work like that the entire time. It seems like you had that thought the whole time. Did this kind of just reinforce that, though?
Oh, absolutely. And then when we get to 9/11, obviously even more. And then there's little things that you see overseas with all the JSATs that we conducted and exercises that we conducted with our counterparts in all of these different locations to where we're working. And I can about name off all those Middle Eastern countries, or those countries from the Middle East to where we work. Some of those folks that you're working with and that you're training on a daily basis, you can really tell who don't want to, in a lot of ways, talk to you or speak to you. And I can't say that never happened. When you're talking and debriefing everybody else or briefing everybody as far as what they're going to do, and then your post-op briefs or your debriefs, you can really see and tell who's paying attention or basically who just don't even want to hear what you have to say. And they're there because they have to be there or they wouldn't be. But even with the people we train, you can tell that not everybody would probably have your back if things were to go bad with that unit that you're training and working with. I'm not going to name off any units, but there's been several. I've seen it. I've seen it in a country or two to where you're handing out diplomas and certificates at the end, and they don't even want to take it. They don't want to shake your hand. And it goes back to it reinforces my point that not everybody is your friend, and not everybody is going to be your friend. And then, we're professionals. We're taking note and being observant, but at the same time, and respectful, and not going to make a scene. But at the same time, we've noticed in a lot of cases what is happening and what is going on, and so if we needed to react in any way, we would. And you can bet we communicate when we see or when something's brought up to the leader's attention that some of that is going on. But it's happened. It happened to me, and I'm sure it's happened to many other people. Not everybody is your friend. And in some units, like Again, I'll leave countries out of it, but we were working with the Army and the police. And in some of these different countries, the Army and the police don't get along, for whatever reason. And then when you're working with both, you can't necessarily work with both at the same time. You can't, your boss tells you, hey, take both of them out to the range, they'll have fun shooting. That's you don't want to do that. You don't want to go to the range with two units that do not like each other at all. What are you thinking? Like, they'll like it. No, that's not a good idea at all. But I can't say that bosses probably didn't come up with that brilliant idea. When you have two units that just are that against working with each other, they'll go sit 100 yards away to where they don't even have to look at the other unit. But this has happened. None of this is getting made up. So, I'll leave the countries out of it on that one.
So let me ask you then, because I've said it a lot on this show, and I'm speaking from a law enforcement perspective on this. When you have things that bother you or things that you see aren't changing, you get jaded. I think it's a very good word to use. So mentally, you're going into these countries, you're training these people that don't want your certificates, they don't want your diplomas, hell, they don't even really want to work with each other. How do you pass that in your head and keep telling yourself we're doing the right thing, this is what we need to be doing, when in some cases it's clearly not working?
Well, when I was younger, and then at my Team 3 days, I was my third platoon, I was the LPO. My second platoon, I was an E6. I would help out the LPO any way that I could and manage my departments. And in the first platoon, obviously, I was just a straight up new guy, to where I would have to, those mentors and those leaders that I followed, that I wanted to operate like and so forth. I'd listen to them, and I wouldn't hesitate to inform them of something, especially if they weren't out at the range or if they didn't see what happened. On certain things like that, enough to where you need to go inform them of this and who it was and exactly what happened, to where they could relay that up, if it's serious enough, back up to headquarters. So it all depends on the level that I'm at. But in those days, a lot of money and a lot of resources and so forth is allocated at 4-star, higher than the 4-star level, but from SecDef on down in a lot of cases, or the chairman on down in a lot of cases. And, you get signed up for that. It's your job as a professional to go do what they have you and tasked you to do, but as I got more senior and I knew who to talk to outside of my chain of command and get things up the chain of command as quick as possible to the right people. I definitely learned that. I wouldn't hesitate to bring that to the right level in hindsight. And I guess it's seeing things younger like that happen, and then and then moving it forward or bringing it forward. I wouldn't hesitate to call my higher headquarters, and having 15 years enlisted and then another 15 and some change, or 16 and some change as an officer. I had leeway and a runway that not everybody would have, at that point. So that I can't say it made me less afraid, but I'm going to do what I can to take care of the people that I'm working with, and that we all go home, whatever that takes. That's my priority. And then I definitely understand the tasking process and all of that. But I'm going to have the ear of whoever I'm working for, wherever it is, from the things that I learned in those my younger days, especially at Team 3 in scenarios like that, in the environments that I worked in all those different countries.
Well, let's talk about moving over to SDV 2. Now, they were decommissioned for a while. They're back online. Let's talk about you going there, the different change of operation, maybe the different change in op tempo, or what's actually happening. Because I don't think a lot of people, I think Navy SEALs, a lot of people know about that. I don't think they know about these SDV teams.
Even in our small community, I mean, active duty wise, we probably still only have like 2,700 SEALs on active duty. So very small community, and so forth. Well, there's a lot of our own SEALs that don't know much about the SDV, the SEAL Delivery Vehicle Mini Submersible Program. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's only, for a while there was only one team. There was two back in 2001 when I was there. I was at SDV2. Our counterparts out in Hawaii was SDV1. But there's a lot of people that, other than those guys operate the mini subs or the submersibles, that's about all they know, and that's some people in our own community. So with it's a distinct mission. It's undersea environment, and that's where your focus is, and it's not just as a mission specialist operating in and out of the back of the boat. It's as a special reconnaissance operator, to where you get out of the back of the boat, you go on land, and they come back and get you 2, 3 days, 4 days later, and so forth. So I went to it was a requirement, and still a requirement to this day. Everybody that goes to an SDV team, that I know of anyway, is trained to pilot that boat or the mini submersible and navigate that boat. So whether you get 7 to 10 dives in that course and you continue to do that, once you get to the SDV team, that depends on what quals you bring to the table, where your focus is, what you're better at, and the number of pilots and navigators you already have in your task unit or your troop now. I was fortunate in my task unit that I was in SDV2. We had 2 of the best pilots in the community that I worked with, and you're very fortunate to have that. But the snipers and the comm guys, the JTACs, and not saying that those quals are not with the people in the front of the boat as well, because some of our guys have all those quals and they're just that good of a pilot during the front of the boat. But definitely the snipers, the comm guys, the JTACs, the trauma corpsmen, the 18 Delta, and so forth, they're going to be operating out of the back and doing over the beach work and working in all the environments, whether it be in a mountainous environment, whether it be in the desert, whether it be in the swamp. If the water touches the land, then that's a good platform for doing what you need to do. Period. I'll leave that at that. But so it has a lot of reach, and you have to be able to work. And then with the SDV that I worked on, we had 2 in the front and then 4 in the back. And let me tell you, that 4 in the back, it was cramped. And then some of those guys had everybody that was 6'2" or taller, trying to fit in the back with all your gear. And if you were going out and doing a 72 to a 96-hour SR over the beach in the winter, you can probably imagine how cramped that back of that boat is. And then if you're in there for 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, I said that the cold water was very uncomfortable in butts. And I went through Winter Hell Week. I think we formed up on January 3rd. So our Hell Week was in February. But I have to tell you, when I got to the SDV team, that's the coldest I've ever been. You're
it's
cold.
East Coast water.
Yeah, you're cold, and whether you're up in Maine, whether you're somewhere that you're operating, and we definitely had a winter workup, all up and down the East Coast. So, and you're going to be in that water, and you're going to be going over the beach. And when you put that, if you bury your stuff, well, guess what? When you come back over, you're probably going to unbury it and try to put it on. And if it's straight as a board, you're still going to put it on. You have to. But you're cold. It's a dark space, totally dark, cramped, and then obviously you're wet. So that's 4 of the 4 very uncomfortable factors that will wreak havoc and for long periods of time. So imagine 7 hours, 8 hours in that environment in the back of that SDV. That's where you got to break it down in maybe 5-minute chunks for something like that. and then you got your work that you got to go do, and there's only 4 of you, so you're pulling some. You don't have no platoon of 16 people or a squad of 7 or 8 people. You got 4 of you, and that's all you got. And if you're out there for 72, 96 hours, if you don't pack in the water, and that carries a lot of weight, you better have a good water source and water purification system on you, and you better be able to use it if that's what you plan on. I learned a lot. I still carry a lot forward from those SDV days, and it's definitely, there's this saying, everybody wants to be a frogman on a sunny day. There's definitely a lot of days where that sun don't come out, and you still got to do that job. So with that, buds help, but there's only so much prep for it. At some point, you just have to deal with it when it comes to the cold, and sometimes you got to shortchange your time in the water, or you may have to, as the leader, make a decision you're going to shortchange your time on land, or what you bring to where on land, and whether you got any type of terrain that you're going to be humping up, or so forth, or whether you can patrol in your dry suit, because if it gets ripped, you're in a world of hurt. so not a good idea.
Bad world of hurt.
So there's a lot of factors that go into that, but there's a lot of things that I learned, and I was in the back of the boat as a sniper and a former comm guy, and that's where all of my work was at that time. And before I went into that task unit, I timed it right. I learned, to this day, he's he probably is my top mentor. He taught me a lot. I worked under him as he was a senior chief. I was a chief. When I showed up to the command there, learned a lot from him. He got redeployed overseas again, so I took over his LCPO SR training not long after I got there. So all of my key milestones and key billets was hit, and I was fortunate in a lot of ways. But my past helped me out in some of that. But timing helped out in some of that as well, to where, I wouldn't trade that time for the world, as uncomfortable as it was at times, because it made me who I am today.
All right, so here's the question. In saying all that you just said about SDV and the cold and all that kind of stuff, a lot of people talk about the blood and the guts and the gore, and some of those stories are okay to hear. I like to hear, and I've learned in 16 years of law enforcement, the funny stories or the worst stories are the best ones to hear. So thinking back on your SDV days, I want to hear the worst, most uncomfortable story that you can remember of operating. You don't have to say where you were operating, anything like that. I just want to hear what happened to you and why it sticks in your head to this day.
Wow. Well, on the SDV, we were working off the submarines, and the submarine commander, he's, they're only going to come in so close. But with that, you have your agreement that's in place, and when you'll be back that's in place, and the commander's probably going to remind you again, you better be back at this time, because we got to come up to where we can pick you up, so you better be there. And they always remind you of that. Well, one of our ops, we were running a little behind, having a little bit of problems with the boat. And that's one of those times to where I mentioned you got to suck it up. And being on the sub, we have our weathermen. They're getting all the data, they're getting all the recordings, they're getting all the currents and the tides and so forth, and we're paying close attention to that. We're taking note of all that. But we knew that we were going to have a very short period of time on land. And long story short, we were running behind. And since we had such a short time on land, there was not going to be enough for a change out. There was not going to be enough time to do much of anything other than what we had planned there on the site that we were heading to. And, we sucked it up in the water. Our weatherman told us that at launch depth, we were going to be at X degrees, and we're like, okay, we can deal with it for then. But once we get up to cruise altitude, it's going to go up into the high 70s. It didn't make it anywhere near that. Where we were operating at was those currents were strong, but what they were doing with that cold water, our weatherman wasn't tracking. And so it fed into our decision to suck it up in the water instead of what we had to do on land. And we paid the price for it. And then, lo and behold, we had the boat issues to where it extended our time. And it's open water column for those boats, by the way, that we were in, or those subs. So you're in the open water column. And so you're feeling it. It was just a very, very long time. Obviously, we didn't meet our timeline. We got back. The commander did what he had to do to pick us up. We planned accordingly from then on. but we sucked it up in the water. So it was, the words don't do it justice as how painful that can be, especially when you've been in the water all night. You do your thing. You get back in the water and it gets extended considerably. You only have so much air.
You said about the 70 degrees. What do you think the water temperature was that you were working in?
Low 60s, maybe high 50s.
And are you dry suiting it at the time?
Nope. We sucked it up like I said, we had some things that we had to do on land, a little bit of terrain. And we decided that we were going to suck it up in the water. We put a lot of faith into the data that we had, and we paid the price for it.
So let me ask you another question to that. You talked about having a short amount of air, or not a short amount, but a limited supply of air. I'm guessing you're working off rebreathers and stuff. So what's your time of air that you have going in and coming back out? How much time do you actually have?
Well, depending on what you're doing, you got and then where you're working in and out of, you got your rebreathers, you got your open circuit, and then you got your boat air, I'll call it. So you have different things, but obviously for this scenario that I gave you, we were back in the boat. So we were working off of our boat air, and with our other rigs that we had on board, obviously there was some air there, but with the boat air in particular, there's only so much,
Right. So I'd just like to point out too that was the problem at the end of Navy SEALs was the submarine wanted to leave them because it had to come up to depth to pick them up. So, it just keeps showing up in your career.
You just mentioned that, but yeah, I guess so.
and like you said, the commander says it over and over. You better be here by this time because the sun's coming up and stuff. So, I mean,
yeah.
So you move on to Naval Special Warfare Group 3, 2004 to 2006. Now, this is when you're first commissioned, correct? This is when you're changing over into the officer.
Well, I went there as a senior chief, EA.
Okay.
And that's when I decided, me and about 3 or 4 other of my peers that I was with at SDV, whether we went warrant or whether we went the officer route, there was a number of us that wanted our commissions at that time. So yeah, once I got to Group 3, I spoke to the Commodore about putting in a officer package. I put it in, got selected right away, and then within a year or so, I went from E8 to O1E.
Is it a huge shift in your world, or do you just keep handling business? Now, of course, you're doing different things, but are you just handling things as normal, or are you getting kind of, drinking through a fire hose, changing over?
Well, as a young guy all the way through E8, you definitely, especially as an LPO, you're working with the AOIC, you're working with the OIC, the platoon commander, troop commander, whatever you want to refer to them as. So you see what they're doing. You see when we're out training at that time is enlisted wise and out jumping, they may be, depending on what admin requirements the officers had, they may be doing something else, and so we would be, whether it be out on the range, out diving, out jumping, and there would be times when we were all together, but depending on what our trips were and how everything shook out schedule-wise, and depending on how many admin requirements our leaders had to make, there's a lot of times they weren't with us. But we took note of it, or at least I took note of it, and many others like me did. And so we saw what they were doing. We, as the LPO, they relied heavily on me, and then I relied heavily on my LPO once I got to the platoon commander or the troop commander positions. So it's all building blocks. And so for me, going through all of those pay grades, and from the time I was LPO, even beyond, and we're small platoons at that point, 16, 17 people, we see what everybody does. We see what the officers are doing, especially when you're on ARG Alphas. You're up there helping them with the reports, and they're helping you with what you got, and when they can, and so forth. So no, I can't say all it was for me, and it's different with other services, is just putting different collar devices on. I was already in khakis. I just went from a senior chief insignia to a butter bar.
So, as you do that as an ensign, and after that, so 2004 to 2006, you're there, but then you go back to a team. You go back to SEAL Team 1 for 2006 to 2008. Now, this is where I would think it would change for you a little bit, because now you're going to go back into, 9/11 has happened, the global war on terror is happening. You have a lot of experience, and you said that you saw what those officers were doing and stuff, but now we're going into Baghdad, Fallujah, Rhamadi. You're doing these things as an officer now. So is it different as you go back into that? And then when you're over there, is it a different environment than you remember as being enlisted over there?
Well, that at SEAL Team 1, that was my first time over in Iraq. We had different deployment requirements at SDV2 from 01 to 04, and then from 04 to 06 at Group 3 with projects and stuff that I worked and managed was just different. So at SEAL Team 1, basically as soon as I got out of my officer training pipeline, my team had just deployed to Iraq, and I met them in Baghdad. And from there, toward the end of that deployment, we were out just past the zoo was our location. Well, we moved to Fallujah, and then started working in and out of there. But that was my first time in Iraq, and then Fallujah was, and Baghdad, it was some pretty hot areas at that time. There was a lot going on at that time. Karma over in Fallujah, we were working every night, in areas similar in that area. It was a lot going on, I have to say. And so without a doubt, it was different for me. But as an ensign showing up to that team, and timing is everything. In the airport in Baltimore, there was this other 15, 16 year, he was a year ahead of me, ensign, that was going over to do basically the same thing as I was going to do for Team 1. He was going to do for Team 3, and he was an East Coast guy, so I knew of him, but I didn't know him personally. And then so he had his job that he was going to be doing. I had my job to where when we got back from that deployment, I was either going to go to training officer or I was going to go to combat systems officer. So we took it as I was going to go to training officer at that time. And my thing was to go out to all of these different outstations and see what was going on there, and then make sure that you take good notes, and that if training didn't meet the mark, then let's adjust it accordingly for our next pump, because we're coming back a year and a half later, after we got back. So with that, whether it be Baghdad and a number of areas there in and around Baghdad, Fallujah, Karma, Haditha, Rhamadi, we were known as the flying ensigns, me and this other ensign, and we knew both of the teams that was over there working. So everywhere we went, we were ex-enlisted guys, we had just got to that point in our officer career. In fact, mine wasn't even 2 months old. So we had our op gear, and then we would show up, and they're like, "Hey, you guys want to go out with us?" And we're like, "Yeah, you bet." So you couldn't have had it any better as two ensigns flying around to all of these different outstations with a lot going on, different, but a lot was going on in each of them. And we would just go from outstation to outstation and operating along the way and taking notes on everything that we observed and talking to the folks that was out there when we got a chance on their training. And then if something didn't meet the mark, recording what that was or all the things that fit that criteria and adjust accordingly when we got back. But initially, it was just like operating in our enlisted days. We did the same thing, and it was just, you couldn't have had it any better than that. Going from outstation to outstation, operating, and then and that was your job, and then by the time all the reports were done, you were off to another outstation. It don't get much better than that as far as getting the work in.
Well, and I agree with you, but I also think that because I knew guys when I was in the Army that were enlisted, then became officers. Those seemed to be the best officers to me. One, because they weren't coming there thinking that they knew everything that was going on. Like you talked about when you get out of SEAL training and stuff, that you might be a little overconfident. You actually know what you're talking about. You know your limits, you know what you can do, what you can't do, and you know where to go to find the right answer. That makes a huge difference. I think you would agree when you're in there, because if you would have come there as an ensign, I don't think going to all these different outposts, they would have asked you, do you want to go out with this? You'd have been on a whole different planet.
No, they definitely wouldn't have. It was just knowing the right people, knowing the leaders. I was a senior chief. I think he was either E6 or E7, and so it was definitely who you knew, and we just happened to know everybody, whether it be East or West Coast teams. We had been around a while. But I totally agree with you, and then I go back to something I said earlier, is never forget where you come from. And that goes the same for the CEOs and all these business leaders. But it definitely applies to officers who were at one time enlisted. Don't forget where you come from. Don't forget where you started. And for, I can't say that there's not officers that out there that it's their way or the highway. They know what's best. You can have 6 snipers telling an officer who is not a sniper, by the way, on where they need their OP set up, their observation post, or their mission support site, or whatever you got going on. You have your reasoning, you have your training, you have your background that you can fall back on, and then you're telling this guy where you want to set up your OPs. He's like, no, I want these over here. And you're like, why do you want those over there? Explain that to me. And of course, that person can't explain it to you. But you have those type of people. They just want to be in charge. They're the boss. They'll remind you of the boss. And then that's the officers. And then you can just, officer enlisted thing aside, when you have leaders like that, and they're around, they're around in all communities. And there's really no exceptions to that. You have that type of leader. And then some do not get weeded out to where these programs are designed to get rid of people like that. They don't catch everybody. You just have to go on your way. And then once you do get out there, that person's not with you. Do what you know is best. But having that savvy to work around scenarios like that, because they exist. They probably exist in my career. But you definitely have those that, no, I'm the boss. This is the way we're going to do this. This is where you're going to set up your OPs. This is where you're going to set up your MSS. Go do it now. And that's not taking care of your people. That's not listening. And being a good leader is being a good listener. Especially when you don't have the qual, you don't have the experience. You've done one platoon. Some of these guys have done 4, 5, 6, 7 or more. It's very important to listen to your experience. And that especially applies to the officers, because like in our community, officers will have your RSO, your range safety officer. They're going to be the range officer in charge. They'll be the dive supervisor. They'll be free fall qual. They might have some an advanced course or two, an advanced spec ops course, I'll call it. or two, but that's about the extent of it. From there, it's listening to your experienced leaders in all of those different departments and trades that you have within a SEAL team or an SDV team, to where they're not the expert. That's why you got to rely on those experts and listen to those experts, pick their brain and what they feel is best and so forth. So point being, don't forget where you come from. And I have to agree with you at times. And I know some great officers now that was never enlisted, and that I don't even know of a couple of them that has any enemies, and that's hard with a long career as an officer. But they're great leaders, and the men and women that work under them know it, and they respect them. And that's not in just admin type environments. That's in combat, and you really see who's who in combat type environments. You see the good leaders, you see the bad leaders. But never forget where you come from and where you started, and take care of your people, but be a good listener while you're at it.
Well, and I think you prove that point, though, especially when you bring up like the dive supervisor. He's not doing anything without that master diver saying that it's good to go. And I found that the best officers and the best command staff in law enforcement are able to listen to the ones down below. I completely agree with you. But the question that I have to that is, you have that world of the enlisted where they should be listening to those guys, but now you're an officer. How do you take that officer, whether they be the same rank as you or maybe a higher rank than you, and tell them this is how this needs to be done, and do it without ruffling feathers?
Well, there's some people, and then, like I said, this is not just officer enlisted and military thing. Some leaders will remind you on a daily basis, even though you completely know who the boss is, they'll remind you, or they feel the need to remind you who the boss is. And there's only so much you're going to be able to do communication-wise with somebody that has that type of mentality first. But it don't take me long, especially the junior officers that come up through the pipeline. And when I was the training officer, and then we're coming up with these scenarios. But the same thing, whether I was an operations officer or other as a troop commander, you see it. And then it's not just with the new guys. Sometimes it might be your troop commander in the next troop over, or one of the younger officers that's working with you, or your XL. But you can pretty much tell, especially when you're the training officer. And I was the training LCPO at SDV2, and then I was the training officer at Special Boat Team 22. When you come up with these scenarios, and they're designed, you design those scenarios to test the troop. And then it's not just to test that leader. And then it's figuring out creative ways to separate that leadership, especially if they're doing everything, or if you have a couple of people that are doing everything. Get creative, figure out ways to make other people that are supposed to be in leadership positions do what they're supposed to be doing as well, and test them. And then obviously evaluate them along the way. So with that and getting creative, you see, especially as the scenario gets challenging, or when something don't go to plan, how well the officers that are in charge, whether it be the troop commander, whether it's the platoon commander, or the third up, you can see when they're not listening to their chief, or their senior chief, or their master chief. You can see when the chief is not listening to his LPO, and sometimes these LPOs, they're an E6, but they got a lot of experience, and they run the men. That's who runs the platoons. And that's one of the hardest positions I held, was the LPO position. We had some challenging folks that I had with some of the people that was in my platoon. They definitely challenged me in a good way. It was I learned a lot. We had some characters, but you can see who is listening, especially when things get tough, and you can see who's not. You can see if somebody wings it, or just grasps at straws and hoping it comes out the best. But 9 times out of 10, it probably is not. And then especially if you can, if it gets so challenging to where the officer starts placing blame. I can't say that I didn't see that, but that's not taking care of your people. That's not listening to your experience. I know that you only have one qual. You've only done one other troop / deployment before you got here. That person that you're not listening to, I've known him for 10 years, 12 years. He's done 6, 7, maybe more, and he recommended to you respectfully what you should be doing or the decision that you should make and report back to higher with, and you chose to go a different route. Why? Explain that to me. So, and that's exactly what I would do. But so it definitely helped me, especially coming from the enlisted ranks, to where when I saw a JO or when I saw a fellow troop commander or platoon commander or XO or even CO, when I was at 30 years, I wouldn't hesitate to tell a CO, I think you're wrong, respectfully, behind closed doors, not in front of nobody, obviously, but I wouldn't hesitate. And here's the reasons why I disagree with you. Explain that, and then they may tell you, well, we're going to do this my way, or they may tell you, you bring up some good points. Thank you. And we're going to change our plan. It's hit or miss at what you're going to get. That all depends on the leader and how good of a salesman you are or good at convincing him to change his plan you were. But, I wouldn't hesitate. And when I was in Afghanistan and I ended up spending 13 months over there, I advised the director on anything that was soft-wise for the 4-star. And I wouldn't hesitate to tell him that, hey, I disagree with what we're doing and how we're going about this. And that director was a senior 06, but, I had been in country 8 months, 9 months, 10 months for some of those scenarios that pop into my head, but I wouldn't hesitate. Now, I have to caveat that with is you get some officer, and there's some out there that very few, and there's some that are just so smart they'll figure out a creative way to get around it anyway. But I have to acknowledge that a lot of young officers didn't have the runway that I had or the leeway that I had as being a former senior chief at that point in my career with the background that I had, the quals that I had to be able to do that, and to be able to talk to that.
But I think you have to point out there, you earned that runway. There's a huge difference, though. And I think that it's a good thing that they're not given that runway because you earned it. You have those qualifications. You can speak, smartly to the things that you're talking about. I don't think it's a great idea to give them that much leeway or that much runway until they've had it hit them in the face a couple times.
Absolutely. And I was just making the point from both perspectives, but from me and where I was, especially, I can say that all the way back to my chief days, as an E7, E8, same thing, I felt it was the right thing to do. But I do acknowledge there's only so much that when a young officer is showing up to a command, and then if he's not listening to his experience, that's one thing. That's easy to critique, and he's either going to listen or she's going to either listen or not. But if they don't, maybe one or two more times, give them some advice as a courtesy, or as a friend or as a peer. It depends on where they fall out, where you fall out in that chain of command. But some they're just going to do with whatever their boss tells them, period. Especially if they're on their first platoon or second platoon and just showing up at a command. And I get that. And I get that you're going to have to get out if you don't listen to that boss too. In the military, I know how the military works. So, but that's why I bring up that runway is I definitely acknowledge the fact that I had runway that others didn't for a number of reasons, and you hit on a couple. But I don't take that for granted, and I don't take their perspective in meeting the boss's intent and whatever their requirements are.
Absolutely. There's two more things that I want to talk about your career. 30 years is a lot. I wanted to talk about the boat teams and stuff, but I think we got to get to some other stuff. The one that really stuck out in my head, And reading through all your stuff was Colombia. From February to November 2012, you're in Colombia. And then, of course, I want to wrap up the career with Afghanistan because there's a lot of questions that surround that. But let's go back to Colombia. You're there from February to November of 2012. I don't know why it stuck out so much to me, but I'm trying to figure out, what are you doing? Why are you down there? And who are you working with?
Well, my role that I was down there for was I was the AOB Colombia deputy working out of the embassy in Bogota. But I was dual-hatted. I was also the NSWTE, so all of Naval Special Warfare that came down there that was working for the mill group fell under the NSWTE. So I was dual-hatted. Working for the Army, I was their commander's deputy. And then I also had all the Naval Special Warfare guys. And we were working in the riverine environment while I was at SBT-22. You see a picture of the SOC-R, the Special Operations Craft Riverine on the wall back there. And with that, though, initially I was down there. Well, I was down there for my deployment, and my deployment just went from 6 months to 9 months because of Summit of Americas 2012. And that's where all of the South America heads of state, Central America, and some in the Caribbean, the heads of state from all those different nations, in this case, they came down to Cartagena, Colombia. And it probably sticks in your mind so much or rings a bell with you. And a lot of people got in trouble down there in that period. In 2012, it was up in Congress on a daily basis as far as what's being done about this. But it was when everybody got in trouble. If you look back at the calendar for early 2012, March, April 2012, when a lot of people got in trouble there in Cartagena, and you can read on what they did. But make a long story short, we were working. My 24 people that I had for that specific thing that we were there for, and protecting all of those heads of state and obviously POTUS, and being where we needed to be, if we needed to be somewhere on our in and around the water that some of his routes was around. I was leading that 24 person element in doing that job while our president was there. But make a long story short, our training and our time, speed, distance for all those points that we had to be kept getting pushed back. So all of my people were out on the water that night working. And it was rough for the Secret Service. It was rough for some other units that was there because they had a lot of people got sent home and there was no replacements that come in. That's probably why it rings a bell.
I want to move on to Afghanistan, and the reason I want to kind of wrap up your career with Afghanistan, because you're in, I think you would agree, you are in not only before, but you are not retired until, quote unquote, the end of the global war on terror. And Afghanistan being so far into your career, the rank that you're at, you're there from January 2016 to January 2017. Now, of course, that's not the end. That's not when we pulled out of there and stuff. But you are very far into Afghanistan's history with this global war on terror. What you're working, and I want to talk about that a little bit. But I want to talk about mainly when you're over there, you are seeing coming to the close of the global war on terror. How does it look different to you over there? Because now you're an officer with all of these years behind you. You have all of this combat experience behind you. And are you seeing cracks in the surface and maybe it not going as bad as it did, but us not taking full advantage of what we could do over there?
You know, I mean, you can go back from day one of our time in Afghanistan all the way until it wrapped up the way it wrapped up. And you can see a number of errors there. But with my time over there, and I learned that country very well, you know. But when I showed up over there, and it was 4 January of 2016 to 27 January of 2017, that deployment started out as 3 months, and that's what it ended up being for a number of reasons. But with it, soon after I got there, it was already at 6 months. And my first job was night chops for basically night chops. And so all of the spec ops work that was going on in theater, period, most of it at night, but day or night, all spec ops work that came through that desk. So all the people I had to talk to from all of the different units that we were working with soft-wise, both from our nation and then all of our counterparts that was over there and all the NATO forces. But the point is even at that point in time, I have to say that my 12-hour shifts a lot of times was 14-hour shifts, 15-hour shifts, 16-hour shifts, depending on what was going on. And I would never know it, that it slowed down from everything that was coming across my desk and the firefights and basically everything that was going on. But I, and that was I learned a lot, and that job taught me a lot. It was a very time consuming job, but when it came time for the next leadership to come in with this organization, 2-star level, and they worked straight for the 4-star level there where I went to, they came in a lot lighter because they're on the books. I think while we were there, it was 4,000 and something. That was our cap for people that was on the books being there. Well, this next unit that came in, 2-star command that's in charge of all of the spec ops, they came in a lot lighter than what we were. And I thought we were light, and others did as well, especially compared to the earlier years that we were there. And so make a long story short, I agreed to stay over there, help the task force that came in out. But I asked to go work over for the 4-star because all those reports that person that I relieved worked off of, I'm the one that drafted those. I'm the one that sent those. I'm the one that followed them up with the phone call and put all that in. So I knew what to expect, and then I couldn't have went into a better position to go to the 4-star commander's place of work for the follow-on 7 months, I'll call it. And to where I would report straight to the deputy. It wouldn't come, anything that I had really wouldn't come through through most of the channels. It would come through my channels. I'd go brief the director, and then from there, depending on who we went to talk to, whether it be the 2-star there or the 4-star, that's what we would go do. But that position I was in as night chops prepared me for that. And but to make a long story short, I never would have thought, especially in that chops role, that it slowed down much, because I can assure you I was busy. In fact, I never ate at the chow hall while I was in that position. It was always eating when I could at the desk, and then a lot of times the food wasn't touched when it was time to go. So very busy position, and a lot of responsibility there. But I learned a ton, and then it paid dividends to when I went to my next position for the 4-star.
So let's talk about Afghanistan for a minute. With everything that you saw going on, you said you thought that we were light when you were in that position, and even more light when the next guy was coming in.
Yeah.
Do you see, when you look at that and see us lightening up or making a smaller presence there, what do we do at the end of that to accomplish the mission? And was that mission accomplished over there?
Are you asking, was the mission accomplished with how everything ended? I would have to say no.
Okay.
There, without a doubt, I'd have to say no.
What could we have done then to accomplish that mission? Let's start with that. What could we have done to accomplish that mission?
We would be here for a while if I went into that. What I can tell you is the 4-star that was running Afghanistan is one of the most, before they came up with their plan, And obviously, he wasn't there when the plan was put into effect for various reasons. But that is one of the most respected men in Spec Ops that's been around as far as you want to go back. He knows what he's doing. He's very smart. He's a super operator. The people he has around him are super people, super leaders, and super operators. And he's a brilliant man and brilliant leader. But operationally, and the operator that he was and still probably is, you probably couldn't have had a better person. So I'll leave it at that. But he wasn't the one that made that decision. But he was obviously in charge of that theater until he left that position.
Absolutely. And the reason I ask you that question is, with that answer there, once again, we go back to what we've talked about over and over in this conversation. Listening to your people on the ground, listening to your people that know what's going on and what needs to be done, you would agree was not done at the end there.
It's not funny. I'm not laughing. I mean, because...
No, I get it.
I've lost so many people in that country, friends, teammates, and so forth, that gave it their all, and they didn't come back home. It's sad. It's sad to see something ended, and then all things are going to probably come to an end at some point. But there's a smart way of ending things, and in making sure that all of your T's are crossed and your I's dotted. I mean, that's owed to that people that are still working there and that have sacrificed so much, and sacrificed it all. It is what it is at this point, but I'll go back to the 4-star that was there. It was a brilliant, brilliant leader and one of the most respected men in all of Spec Ops.
So let me ask you something, and it's kind of a philosophical question about it. When you look at that, and I look at it from my perspective in law enforcement, does this ever go away? Because this happens time and time and time again, where we come to the end or we come to a major operation and we don't listen to the people that can give us the information for whatever reason, whether that be like we talked about before, I'm the boss, we're going to do it my way, I think I know better, whatever it is. Does this ever go away? And how does this continue to hurt not only the special operations community, but military, first responders, and law enforcement?
I mean, again, we're talking about the military here, but whether you're talking Fortune 50 company or just in the business world, the leadership and how they interact and listen to their people and take care of their people. Each scenario is different, but the bottom line is you have to do things right, and you have to take care of people. And if you want to see some of the repercussions about a lot of the decisions, I mean, look at our recruiting levels right now.
Absolutely.
And how low our recruiting levels are. Okay, you pick a service, pick one. It doesn't matter. And then some numbers are as bad as they were. I was born in 1972, and we know what was going on in 1972. The military wasn't that popular during that time period. The recruiting was horrible during that time period. These numbers right now are compare across the board to 1972. Well, there's reasons for that. I'll leave it for the audience to figure out what those reasons are. But there's reasons.
Can you speak to that at all, though? I would really like to hear from you. You have a ton of experience. You, better than a lot of people, can speak to that. Why is that? Why are we so? What has changed so much that we're down these numbers? Because that's an insane number that we're at right now. And we're seeing the same thing in law enforcement. We're down tons and tons. But what is it that we're doing wrong that are dropping these numbers?
I mean, the focus. I mean, you got to, as a military, there are certain things that you have to focus on that you should consider your priorities. And there's a lot of good military leaders that help develop those priorities or validate those priorities and so forth. But you know, it's a political game. It's in a lot of ways, and you can't get around that. Whatever side of the aisle people are on, you got your checks and balances that are in place for the big three. Well, I mean, the leadership. They are more of politicians than they are of service members, and then general officers or flag officers, if you want to go there. They're more so a politician now. So that's half of it. And then that goes back to that goes into a lot of things. But obviously, if they don't do what their boss is telling them to do and what he wants them to do, what do you think happens there? And but the other side of that is I don't know. It's a political game right now, and it's no longer just the big three. There's checks and balances, or there's supposed to be checks and balances, I should say, for those big three. It's designed to where there is. Well, there's really no checks and balances for the leaders that are where they're at. Let's face it. If you're coming up for a star, whether it's Navy or Army, and you're not on the home team, whatever that home, well, if you're not on the home team, do you think you're going to get a star?
Absolutely not.
Unless you have hit it very, very well, or your true beliefs very, very well. If you're not on the home team and you're coming up for a star, and then all these people that are making decisions are 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, do you think you're going to get that star, A? And then B, if you do get lucky and get that star, how long are you going to be around? So it's a political game right now to where it's impacting a lot of decisions. And when you talk about a scenario or what happened in Afghanistan, that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy. And a lot of blood, sweat, and tears there. A lot of lost lives there of great people, great operators, and we exited the way we did, and I'm good with everything coming to an end. It's just ending it the right way, bringing everybody home that is over there that you brought over back. Bring them back, and be successful at whatever you set out to do. But no, I mean, there's so are recruiting, and then if they whatever publish the numbers on retention, take a look at the retention numbers. Take a look at what's happening to the guards numbers and how many people are getting out left and right. But the bad thing is it's not just you and I that sees this. This is people around the world that sees what is going on. But I haven't seen too many, without it being close hold numbers per se, I haven't seen too many numbers get out on what the retention levels of small communities like the one I came from looks like. But I can tell you, there's a lot of people that are wanting to do something else for a lot of reasons.
And I would like to bring into that this woke culture. And I want to bring that up because just recently in the news, within the past week, we have, and I thought about it when you said you had these Vietnam trainers and these guys that were running you through the scenarios, and what they did then might not work now. And I would even go back to the 90s when I went in, stuff that they did then couldn't happen now or wouldn't happen now. You have Navy SEAL instructors getting in trouble because they thought that the training was too harsh. I think you better, once again, than a lot of people can speak to, there's a reason it's harsh training. There's a reason that you're putting these people through the scenarios and the situations that you're putting them through.
Without a doubt. And if you don't make that training, and then you're constantly tweaking it from what you learn in combat and what you learn overseas. Sometimes it's what you learn in workups and with the innovation and technologies that's out there that wasn't there years ago, but that's there now. It may help the leadership out It may help you out equipment wise, but just taking constantly. I'm real big on continuous learning, and I'm real big on continuous improvement. And from '01 on, from all this data we was getting back from working in the mountains of Afghanistan or working out in the desert, and working at altitude, whatever. Initially, we didn't have the data, but we tweaked our training, we tweaked our locations. We tried to make it as realistic with what is actually going on in all of these areas. If it's something going on in Yemen, then if we had people going over in Yemen, then that was incorporated. But if it was techniques and stuff that the other areas of the world and the people that occupy those areas are using or could possibly use, then it was training for all. But it was definitely training for the people that was going to that area, to where we're learning what these TTPs are for whatever adversary or counterparts or that you may be going up against. But you have to make that training as realistic as possible. Obviously, all of your risk assessments are done. All of your training signed off on by the boss, whatever level that may be that you're working, and your control measures in place. But it is as realistic as possible, and there's a fine line that you can't cross, but you have to get as close to that line as you can, or you risk people going over to an environment that is still hot and has been hot for a long time, and then people don't come home. That's what you risk. And then if that training is not realistic, or if you got somebody, and I have to say that these people exist, to where they come to a command in the military, a lot of your officers, they'll come in for 2 years and they're gone. So they want to come in, they want to get that 2 years. Not all of them, but some of them, they want to come in unscathed or get all of their milestone and all their checkoffs done and get out of there unscathed and go on to their next milestone, to where they can get their next promotion and then go from there. But all they're worried about, every decision that they make, is how it looks on them and how it looks to as to get to that next milestone, and
Absolutely.
then and then for the ones that have stars in their eyes, it's even worse. And you can generally tell the people that have stars in their eyes, whether they do or don't, or they don't recognize it or not. You can tell. There's some people that really don't want that training officer to train as realistic as possible, because something bad could happen on their watch. That training officer, if that happens, or that training LCPO, if and when that happens, has to be able to be creative if necessary and convince that boss that we're making a huge mistake. And here's what's going to happen when these people leave and go on their deployment, or next command, and then goes on deployment there. But they're particularly concerned with where they're at and then the deployments that's going to be done under them. But it's huge, and you can only do that not just. And then if the training is the same every year, that's not what I'm saying either. You're tweaking that training, and maybe even on a daily basis, for all of this stuff that you're getting back from theater and all of those areas that you're operating in worldwide. You're getting all that data in, and you're adjusting accordingly. And then the training officers have to stay up on that, because the enemy's TTPs change just like our TTPs change. But that realistic training, it's huge. And if you shouldn't be a training officer if you're not going to be training your personnel, as hazardous as it may be. You may be in your uncomfortable zone a couple of times or on a nightly basis, depending on what you're doing. But you have to do that for your people, or you're putting them in harm's way without the tools and resources that they need to survive and bring everybody back.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think we're seeing it a lot more over and over. And I don't know where that switch was flipped, to where I'm sure it's always been there, but I feel like it's a lot more present these days, with people trying to get into those positions of power, doing just whatever needs to be done to get into that position, not necessarily learning that position. Let's move on to your retirement. 31 years, you get out. Do you have any trouble at all transitioning from being a soldier every day and seeing everything you did to being Joe Citizen?
I mean, the transition is different for everybody. It really is, and there's no real cookie cutter approach to it, or one size fits all. It is different, and for me, I had a blast my 31 years, and then honestly, I'm still looking for the right fit for me, for my family, for the next employer. Something that it's not really work if you have fun going to work every day and you're enjoying it, and everybody else's morale is in your workspace or your business or organization. If morale's sky high, then that's not really work. But in finding that right fit, it's challenging and it can be hard. And then there's so many lessons learned, whether it be from my own lessons that I've learned, or whether it be from my friends that I talk to. I try to help out veterans, whether they're communicating with the VA, trying to get their disability rating, whether they're preparing for their next job, whether they've got a work-life balance that they're trying to massage. Sometimes I'm a better coach than I am for making sure I do it for myself, if that makes sense. But I enjoy helping people. I enjoy talking to people. I get, whether it be people I work with or just friends of friends, I get a lot of phone calls, doing podcasts like yours. I'm sure my phone with one of your listeners be listening, and they'll get my contact info, and they may have some questions or want me to dive deeper in a topic. But the point there is, I try to help everybody, but it's different for everybody. And some things that I took for granted, or little things like you get this unbelievable offer, like when you work with a startup. And startups can be good, especially if somebody has a nest egg or a lot of savings, and they're well set up and they can afford a year or afford a year and a half or 2 years to where they're not making much, but the sky's the limit as far as once that startup company gets up and running. But and then a lot of times you'll get these startup companies or these people with high hopes and so forth. They say, hey, gross profit, I'll give you 25% gross profit of what we bring in. That sounds like a really good deal. However, if it takes that company a year or 2 years to get up to running, and you don't have any salary, it's all based off of commission, that 25% is not doing anything for you. Yeah, it's promising. The other company or companies that this individual or individuals are running are very successful, so this one will too, especially if they're wanting to lean out that company or organization. And that 25% is not so good at that point. So it can be great, but things like that can be easily overlooked. And then when a person gets 2 months, 3 months, 4 months into something like that, if they don't have the savings and the nest egg to fall back on, that could be huge. You combine that with somebody that has done multiple tours to Iraq, multiple tours to Afghanistan, and for whatever reason they thought that they were going to be taken care of for the VA, and lo and behold, they get their rating back and it's half or 3/4 worse than what they initially expected and was advised that they were going to get going in. And then you combine that with the crushing defeat of this promising job, 25% of gross profit you're going to make annually, and you're now making 25% of what you're expected as far as your disability, and that's all the income, and yet you got a family to take care of. So I can go on, and but veterans in transition is huge, and then with that, it's so much more than just transitioning out of the military. It's I'll call it just people transitioning back from combat deployments. They've been running hard for 10, 15, 20 plus years, and they're still running hard to this date. But they've seen some things overseas to where, they're not right, or something's just not right up here. They got a heavy heart, or they lost a couple of people, and then sometimes it's just wrong place, wrong time. Sometimes it may be a bad call or a bad decision, or something your spidey senses was going off and you decided to do it anyway, and people didn't come home. So the point there is there's no cookie cutter approach. This veterans in transition thing to where I try to help out people, whether it's getting them into the right program that is right for them and their situation and their family. And the problem there is there's so many programs. Well, there's a lot of programs out, but I can't tell you that a lot of people know about all the programs that are out there that can help them, whether they're coming back with some issues or mental issues that they need to work on from overseas prior to getting back into their community and going home to their family after a very hard deployment. And then if their bosses don't know those people, or if they're not in that next group to go out and deploy for the bosses, they may not be concerned with them. And then lo and behold, they get out 2 months later, and then these people are out on their own. So you can go on and on with veterans in transition as far as the big picture is, and trying to do better and getting people to the right program that's best for them, their family, their situation. But it's hit or miss as to whether leaders even know about these programs to where these people are getting out. Officers are usually taken somewhat good care of. Senior enlisted are usually taken care of. For the most part, there's gaps and seams in both. But you take these infantry soldiers that's done 5 years, 6 years, 7 years that get out. They come back with like a month left or 2 months left in service, which you're not even supposed to be able to do. And they get out 2 months later. They don't have all their paperwork in line for going and dealing with the VA. They get shortchanged there. You can just see how that bad situation just snowballs and gets worse and worse. So I work with a lot of people, or try to work with a lot of people. I'll continue to do that even when I find my next or the right fit for me, my family, and the new employer. And my network I'm proud of my network. It's a powerful network. So if I can help out in any way, I try to, and sometimes it's out of my control other than pointing people in the right direction, but it's worth a shot if somebody needs help. So that's where I'm at today.
So let me ask you, we talked about your father traveling a lot when you were a kid. We didn't really talk about your family, but 31 years, you were traveling a lot. You were gone a lot, whether that was certifications, deployments, combat, whatever it may be. The questions that I have for your retirement are, what mistakes did you make as you leaving the service, and what mistakes did you make, or maybe the right choices that you made with your family getting out?
I'm better at coaching others, especially when I was senior enlisted or as an officer, and then I would pay attention to these kind of things. You've seen my quals and so forth, and most all those quals happened while I was enlisted, and then it was a workup. It was schools and so forth, and any off time that I had, work up for deployment, which was a year and a half, and you can't really miss those key blocks of training. You can't really miss without a very good excuse any blocks of training, and then deployment. And that cycle was I repeated that for most all of my career. I honestly traveled so much outside of those schools, and then that continued all the way through until the day I left. I mentioned my Afghanistan was 3 months at the start. It ended up being 13 months. Out of all the people that I've been fortunate to work around and work with, and then these two are officers, and they're very good officers in my community, highly respected officers at that, that has been as close to a work-life balance of 50-50 to where they didn't cheat their work and they didn't cheat their home. But I can definitely count the people that was that successful. It's probably only those two, and definitely under 5. As far as getting that work-life balance is close to 50-50 without cheating one side or the other. Usually a person, at least in our community, with that op tempo that we had even before 9/11, but especially after 9/11, all the way until I got out, the work is always there. But when you have a work-life balance of 90-10, and that's just not right either way, and so with that, and then in learning from some of my mistakes and seeing where I went wrong, and I'm very thankful that I still have my family with me. Not everybody's so lucky, but I'm thankful. But there's so many things My daughter, she's already in college right now. My youngest daughter is already in college right now. So much I missed, and you can't be a good operator, good husband, good father, good person, and then have a 90-10% ratio there, whether you're in the favor of work or whether you're in the favor of the family. You're cheating one side or the other. They're big time. But I made it a point to pay close attention to all the people that I worked around, and then it didn't take me much to spot somebody that was working a very large number on one side or the other of that 50-50 split without cheating either side. But if I always told all the people I've talked to, and it's been a good number, that at the end of the day, even as small as communities as we are and were, 2,700 active duty, it's probably less than that now with the people getting out. You're a number, and your number is up. The Navy, everybody's replaceable. Let's face it. I don't care what position you're talking about. Everybody at every level is replaceable, and at some point you're going to be replaced. Your number's up. Do you think the Army is going to recognize when one person gets out of all the people that are serving in the Army? And the same thing with the Navy. But it applies to even in our community, as small as ours is, and others, some are even smaller. When your number's up, what you have left is your friends, your teammates. Yeah, we have social media that's present now that it aids you in keeping in contact with your swim buddies, your teammates, your close friends, and all these places that you work, whether it be CONUS or OCONUS overseas, and some of the friends you met with your counterparts overseas. But you have your friends, your family, and you got your memories. That's it. But your number is up other than that. And when you get out in the middle of West Texas, or when you get out in the middle of nowhere, and those people are not around, and you don't have that swim buddy to go talk to, or that confidant to go talk to and pick their brain, or just share that, hey, I'm having a problem right now, or I'm struggling right now. I'm not where I need to be for whatever reason right now. Your Warriors and Whiskey logo that you have up there, that's one of the reasons the three founders, who are all military or veterans now, came up with that program, is to help out in areas like this, by the way, and in still providing an environment to where you can get together as a first responder, as a military service member, as a veteran, families and friends of those, all of the above can join that Warriors and Whiskey. But bringing people into where, hopefully, if you know somebody well enough and somebody were to have a problem, if you didn't have events like that, you probably never even know until it's too late that the person was struggling. And maybe it's something as simple, you go to one of these events that the girlfriend or the wife says something that, yeah, Johnny, he's just not doing well right now. He was going to have this high-paying job, something fell through at the last second, and so forth. But he's taking it hard, real hard, But if you didn't have that event, you would never know that. So we're just trying to come up with creative ways. Warriors and Whiskey, Veterans Whiskey Club, Veterans Cigar Club is all just one of those means to do that. To get people together, have fun while you're doing it, tell your sea stories, comment stories, war stories, and so forth. But at the same time, hopefully something gets brought to your attention like that, or there's a family member or a girlfriend or a wife or husband that says, hey, I may need you to help here in a week or so. We're going through this right now. That transition is just different from everybody, that work-life balance. And that applies, it applies in the military, but it applies in whatever job a person's doing, and try to not cheat either side. Do your best within the time constraints that you have for both to not shortchange, and keep it in your head. It wasn't even in my head at first. I was just trying to do well in my new community that I was a part of, thankful that I was there and having fun, and but it's there now, and I look for that now and trying to help people in the future. But turn it back over to you.
Let's talk about this Warriors and Whiskey. First off, there's a Veterans Whiskey Club, Veterans Cigar Club, and then the Warriors and Whiskey Club. let's talk about favorite whiskey first off.
Well, I like bourbon, and then with the bourbon, I like Colonel Taylor and the small batch. That's probably my go-to. It's not too expensive. You got some high quality, expensive bourbon out there. Of course, I won't turn that down, but for something I'll drink regularly.
Do you have a favorite cigar?
I'm not the biggest. The Cuban cigars is what my friends would always ask for, depending on where I was going. But I'm not.
Listen, don't incriminate yourself in any form or fashion.
I'm not the biggest cigar fan, to be honest with you. I know it goes well with certain whiskeys and so forth, and cognacs and so forth, but I'm not the biggest fan, and I will stay away from it when I can. But yeah, we got the Warriors and Whiskey Club, Veterans Whiskey Club, and Veterans Cigar Club.
So let's talk about what they're doing. They are working a couple projects, this Warriors and Whiskey. Now, one of the programs they're doing right now for service dogs is Canines for Warriors program, where they're connecting service members or veterans with actual service dogs. Why is that such an important thing to do these days?
Well, that's part of, and then that's just one of the nonprofits. And
right.
These ambassadors, I think we have for all of the clubs, the ambassadors, there's probably 75, 76. The number's growing. We're expanding in the city and state. We're probably close to most of the audience, if not yet, soon. So with the Veterans Whiskey Club and the Veterans Cigar Club, that's veterans or service members can join those clubs. With the Warriors and Whiskey Club, that's veterans, service members, families of both, and then first responders and families of first responders that can join the Warriors and Whiskey Club. So with those three whiskey clubs, you got your ambassadors that are charged with, in their area, and I'm for Pensacola here, the ambassador for Pensacola, in setting up events to where whether it's a local whiskey establishment or out in the middle of a park or a field, to where, or at a fair or wherever you can set up an event at, bringing people together, get as many people as you can that fit that criteria, and anybody's welcome to come out to the events, and then have fun and tell your stories and so forth. And depending on the negotiation skills of those ambassadors and so forth, say you're holding an event at your local whiskey club, and that if somebody is a member of these clubs and they come with a coin, maybe you can get them in free, or they drink for the 3 or 4 hours that you have the place reserved for half off, or so forth. Maybe you can get 50% or 20% of the gross profit for that 3 to 4 hour period, go to Canines and Warriors and support their great cause that they have. So the Navy SEAL Foundation, they're constantly looking at all of these nonprofit organizations that are doing great work and expanding. We're looking to expand, and we will, but depending on what can be negotiated and how much can be sent over to those orgs for great causes, depends on how many people show up to the events and where you hold them, how well they're planned, and so forth. And that's the ambassador's role and within all of the members for your local area. But the sky's the limit, and you can do the same type of communication, have the same communications rather, with the local whiskey stores and so forth, where when a member of the club, they come in with the coin or the sticker or whatever, they get a discount on by 10%, 15%, and so forth. So the sky's the limit. And but a lot of the majority, wherever you set up the events, will go to a good cause, whether it's Canines for Warriors, organizations such as the Navy SEAL Foundation, Commit Foundation, and so forth. I'm just throwing a couple of them out there, not saying that they're members, but maybe one day.
All right, so let's talk about anything else that you have on the horizon, because I know at one point there was talk about a TV show and things like that. Is that still in the works?
No, the timeline, the veterans in transition and everything that was happening there, whether veterans coming back with needing to get into a program like the Honor Foundation, or getting to, they come back and they require a service animal, or they require some type of treatment where you get them out in nature, You get your big surfers back that like the water. The water relaxes them. They had a hard deployment. They go out and, with one more wave and then do surf therapy. And these programs are not one size fits all. It's finding the program that's right for that individual, their needs, their family, their situation. And obviously there's a long trail of things that probably led up to the person needing that type of treatment. But you have all of these programs and you have all of these people that are doing great work for these organizations. And so one of my main goals through social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and word of mouth, probably more than any of them, is getting people to the program that best fits their needs and requirements. And when I still have people, or I still have friends in leadership positions at the commands that I were a part of, and talking to them, and when I do, not calling them to talk about this kind of stuff, but oh, by the way, are you aware of these 5 programs that are in your area that offer this for your service member? And 9 times out of 10, there's a good chance that they may not even be aware that program exists, and so I'll share literature with them like that. So everything that, minus the TV show that Veterans in Transition set out to do, whether it be a service member getting out, whether they serve 5 years or 40, that's still there. The work is still being done. The timeline just did not line up between what the leadership out in Hollywood wanted and what the nonprofit schedule was wanting to do, and so forth. So there was a lot that went into pushing that back. So right now it's still on as far as helping out any way possible with the Veterans in Transition, but the TV show is not going to happen this fall.
Well, that's a good way to kind of end this. Let's talk about everywhere that someone can get a hold of you, everywhere that someone can look into your Vets in Transition with the help with the Warriors and Whiskey. Let's just go down the list of everywhere people can find you.
Well, I sent you my Facebook link, my LinkedIn link. I'm on Instagram. I don't follow that, and I'm not as diligent on that platform. But I still have an account there. Obviously, my email address, feel free to share that with your audience. And then you have my cell phone number as well. But all of those social media platforms, I love to help people. I love to help out where I can, when I can. And that's not just for service members and veterans. It's for anybody that needs help that I'm in a position to assist. And if it's offer advice or so forth, that may help somebody too. Feel free to share everything that I sent via email, but I can be reached via all of those different platforms.
Well, Tim, you have an amazing story. 31 years is so long, and I feel like we could go about 6 more hours on the stuff that you've done, the stuff that you're doing right now, and the stuff that you have planned for in the future. But I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, telling your story and getting the word out that you're here to help. Guys, I think that's going to be it for tonight. Now, remember, if you want more of me, you can always find me on a couple places. You can find me on Instagram at the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD podcast. And you can find me on YouTube, where all these conversations are in video form at the DTD podcast. Don't forget, though, the one-stop shop, dtdpodcast.net. That's going to be everywhere that you're going to find for this show. Audio, video, pictures of Tim, pictures of his career, find out all of his links, and then you can go through the catalog of other shows that are on here. Also, don't forget warriorsandwhiskey.com. That's warriorsandwhiskey.com. Help get them the word out all over. They're doing great things for veterans in transition and veterans in general. Last but not least, don't forget our sponsor, Police Coffee at policecoffee.com. You know they're an officer-owned business. You know they're dedicated to crafting the finest coffees and blends. And you know they're shipped as soon as they're made to provide you with the freshest coffee possible. Each batch is roasted fresh by people who knows what it means to stay vigilant. And their specialty coffees don't miss out when one drop of flavor is concerned. Their coffee's some of the best you'll find, but it also serves an important cause, and we talk about it every week. 50% of their profits go towards to helping family members of police officers who fell in the line of duty. And when you go to policecoffee.com, put in DJK10, you get 10% off your order. Guys, thanks so much for stopping by, hearing this amazing story of 31 years of service to this country. Thank you, Tim. That's Tim. I'm DJ. This has been the show. We'll catch you guys on the next one. See you later.